day, he had to call me first.
Okay. Okay, so let me think here. Sorry, I gotta. So living in Lantana. I don't want to jump too far ahead here. What was the thing you liked the most about that house when you first moved in?
Oh, well, I thought I was in hog heaven because, I mean, here I was in a 1-bedroom, or 2-bedroom, 1 bath. And, okay, this was an older house because it had, I remember it had black linoleum with sprinkles in the kitchen. On the, and I just hated that floor. But, we started, fixing the house up and changing things, whatever, painting and all that stuff. Because the people that had the house before us, the guy had a motorcycle or whatever, anyway, he would bring it in the house and work on it.
Oh, wow.
So, but we've changed the carpeting and all that stuff. Anyway, it got to be our house.
And when did Frank and Zillabelle come along? Were they already there?
Oh, no. The first neighbors that we had, and I can't even remember their names, but he was chief of police.
Okay.
And he lived next door. And got to be friends and everything. And then they moved out. He retired and they moved out. And the next couple, there was another couple. Maybe it was Frank and Zulabelle that moved in next. Because after Frank and Zulabelle, when they retired and moved up north, they sold it to Lisa and her husband. And so it was Frank and Zulabelle that were our second neighbors.
Okay. And then on the other side were Bill and Ada there?
Bill and Ada
For
were
long.
always there, they didn't move.
Yeah, well, no, they moved eventually.
Well, eventually they moved,
But
yes.
they were there.
All the time, growing up with Chris and all that.
Oh, okay. And, so what was the toughest things about, raising a kid, as he's 8 years old by the time you guys get to Brea? I
think the hardest thing was, of course, I was working at the time, and I didn't get to spend as much time as I wanted with him. Because I would get him up in the morning and feed him his breakfast, then we would go to work, and I would call him when it was time for him to leave, in case he fell asleep, to go get on the bus. The school bus used to stop there. And, but I just, and then we'd come home from dinner, and I'd have to cook dinner and everything else. And then he would do his homework, or he had done his homework, and I helped him with that, checking it or whatever. And then it was time for him to take a bath and get ready for bed. So I didn't really get to spend as much time as I wanted with him.
What about the weekends? What were your
The
typical
weekends? Well, the weekends, it was Saturday, get up in the morning, and start the washing and the cleaning. I tried to get that all done on Saturday so that on Sunday it wasn't so hectic and push to get ready to go to work on Monday.
And what would you guys normally do on Sundays?
Oh, well, I don't know, we had friends and they'd have picnics or barbecues or, all kinds of things like that. Nothing special, nothing that we did, week after week.
Who were your closest friends at the time? Like, when Dad was a kid, I guess.
Oh, well, I didn't have that many friends. I mean, we'd had some. I guess Jackie and Melvin. Even though Jackie, she was a sweetheart. She worked for the post office, and she died. Finally, I think she had cancer. And the Melvin, he was just a drunk. He stayed in his garage all the time, and he didn't work. Jackie supported him. So I guess they were our most friends that we had. I mean, we had other friends, but they were the closest.
They're the closest, and you spent a lot of time with Aunt Millie and Uncle Wayne, or?
It was a catch-22. It's just, we didn't spend a lot of time with them, but we would go up and visit, on the weekends or whatever.
So how was it being the wife of a future political guy? 1982.
It was nerve-wracking. Well, he was running for office, city council in Brea. And Tommy is very opinionated, and he also, you can't maneuver him. A lot of these people wanted him to vote, see if he would vote their way and give them benefits and all this stuff. And he's not that type of person. He won't do it. And he made it very clear that he wouldn't do it. So that meant he was not going to win. And we all sort of knew that. But he did very well in the showing. We walked the streets and handed out flyers, and he went on television, and there was debates and stuff like that. But he made a good showing.
And was he hard to live with after he lost?
No more so than before. He's always been hard to live with.
I'll slap you.
All right. So, let's see. That was 82. So, Dad was a teenager already.
Yeah, Chris was born in 67.
Okay. So when did he start messing around?
Messing around with who?
All right, messing around. When did he start being a
teenager?
A teenager.
From day one. I
Yeah.
mean, he did everything that a teenager could do. Of course, his father had already done most of them, so he couldn't get away with anything. And he was a pretty good kid. He didn't give us any problems. Of course, as he got older and grew up, we found out that he was doing a lot of things behind our back that we didn't know about. Or at least I didn't know about it. Tommy may have known about it.
Yeah.
But he didn't tell me. And, but he, all in all, he was a pretty good kid. He didn't give us that much problems or anything like that. School, he didn't care for school. And I wanted him to go to college, but he didn't want to because he'd had enough school. And so that kind of kiboshed that. And we had always told him that you don't have to work while you're in school, but when you get out of school, you got to get a job. And so he couldn't get a full-time job, so he would get numerous part-time jobs. He may have had 2 or 3 part-time jobs in one day. And but he did that, and he paid for his bills or whatever. Anyway, he still had the credit card for gas and stuff like that. But at least he was earning some money.
And so once he got out of school, did you guys have any? I mean, obviously he was still at home before his accident, but did he have any? Did he have to move out? I mean, did you guys, tell him he had to move out at a certain point or anything like that?
No, we had never given him a time limit or anything like that. The only qualification, like I said, was you have to work.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't going to lay home and watch television and all that stuff while we were out working.
Mm-hmm.
Of course,
He had a lot of good friends.
he did. He had got a lot of good friends, and he was dating at the time, but we never told him, okay, you're gonna move out when you're 20 years old or something like that.
Did you like any of his girlfriends?
Yeah, on the most part, I liked him.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I did not like your mother.
It's okay. I understand why. All right. So I'm gonna back up a little bit because and tell me if there's anybody else that was doing this, but at one point wasn't Regina living with you guys?
Well, at one point, Regina was living with us, and also Greg Stockwell was living with us.
Okay. Regina came first?
Regina came first.
So how did that happen?
Well, she was having trouble at home. Her and her father didn't get along.
Who is she? I guess.
She was a friend of Chris's that he had met at church, and she was a nice girl. She was a good girl, and she was going to school, and she was going to nursing school, and it turned out she went into what do you call it?
Physical therapy.
Well, it was like physical therapy, but she would take care of sick people and stuff like that, like a nurse, but she didn't give shots and stuff. And I think she gave breathing exercises and stuff. So I'm not sure what her technical name was.
Okay.
But she stayed with us for quite a while. And then she finally moved out. And not too long after she left, Greg moved in. He was having trouble at home.
And how did you guys meet him in the first place?
He went to school with Chris.
Okay.
And we had known him since we had moved there. And because they went to school all the time that Chris was there in Brea. And and all the parents, I mean, they were glad that we took their kids in, because at least they knew where they were and they were eating and stuff like that. And they had to follow the same house rules as Chris did.
And so how long was Greg living there for?
Greg lived there. He lived there for quite a while too.
That's 6 months.
Yeah. Okay, it wasn't as long as I thought then. Anyway, he 6 months to a year, and finally he wasn't working at the time, and I had given him a deadline. Okay, you got to get a job, or you're out. And I can't remember if he had an accident, and I can't remember even what it was. But his mom came to the hospital, had to sign the emergency papers and stuff like that. And that brought them back together anyway. Anyway, he ended up moving back home.
Okay. And that was before, he was, I guess, still in high school at the time, probably, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And, alright, so then...
Well, no, wait a minute.
Or was
They
this
weren't in high school
right
because...
after high school?
Yeah, it was right after high school because we had always told Chris, you don't have to get a job while you're in
Right,
school.
that's right. Okay, and so then after, so he's at a high school, and you're still working for the trucking company.
Yes.
When did you go to work for Aunt Millie?
Oh, goodness.
Was that much later?
I don't remember the year that I went to work for her. I had been with the trucking company for like 10 years or so, 11 years.
Okay.
And then I went to work for Millie. And that we were in, let's see, where were we? We were in Newport Beach when we first started out. And then we moved to Santa Ana, I think it was. Anyway, we had a couple of locations. And she had a crew of about 6 girls working for her.
Doing,
Data entry.
okay. And so, okay then, I guess we can talk about, oh, this came first. Okay, so my mom came around, and I was gonna talk about the accident, but technically this happened first.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess my mom started coming around with my dad.
Actually, I saw your mom 2 times. Once we used to go out to dinner every Friday night. 'Cause I would ride to work with Millie. And we would meet Tommy and Wayne at some restaurant, and have dinner on Friday night. And that one particular Friday night, Chris was gonna go there also, and he brought Jody. And she didn't say one word. She just sat there, and everything. So that was my first encounter with your mother. And the second encounter was they came home late from a date or something, I don't know. Anyway, they went to Christopher's room, and your mother was planning to spend the night, I think. Anyway, Tommy put the kibosh on that. He called Chris, because Chris had a different phone number, because we didn't want any phone calls late at night. And so he called Chris and told him, okay, that's enough, out. So he took Joni home.
And so you met her twice, and that was what
And that was the third time that we met her was when she came to the house with Chris, and they told us that she was pregnant with you.
And so what happened was you guys he was 21 at the time?
He wasn't 21, because he was in the.
She was 20.
He was 20 at that point.
Okay. So he was 20. They came home and said she was pregnant. What was you guys' reaction?
I just asked. I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I says, "Are you going to get married?" And Chris says, "No." He was very adamant.
Wonder why.
And I think that's one reason why Joni disliked him so much. But he, anyway, they said that no, they weren't going to get married. And I says, okay, are you going to keep the baby? What are you going to do? And, they didn't have that much to say and everything. So we said, well, okay, you guys think about it and you let us know what you're going to do. And that was all that was said. That's the last time I saw Joni before, well, I didn't see her when she had the baby, and then she hid out on us, and we didn't find you until you were like 2 years old.
So that was it. That was the one time.
Mm-hmm.
What was Dad dealing with at the time? Because before, so in between that and his accident, I know they had gone their separate ways, and he started dating another girl. I guess I don't know. All right, so we'll just move on to the accident because I don't know.
What?
I don't know there are questions in that. I guess yeah. So I'll save that for his documentary.
Well, see, they came over. Joni was pregnant when Chris was 20, and then Chris got in his accident about 2 weeks after his 21st birthday.
Okay.
So that'll give you a time,
Yeah.
He was in the hospital when she delivered you.
Yeah.
And of course there was nothing he could do about it at that point.
Of course.
And he started, he went to the lawyer and everything and started looking for you seriously when he got out of the hospital.
So let's go, I guess the day of the accident, or the night of the accident.
Oh, God.
This is going to be I told you this is where it's going to get serious. So, it was a night, yeah, tell me about the night of the accident, I guess, or...
Well, he was going out with a girl, her name was Evie, I think it was. Evie or Evie, I think. And she had 2 kids. And they were going to a party. Okay, they went to the party, and then at some point, Chris decided to go home.
He had to be back home because he got a promotion.
Yeah. And he had to go to work the next day. And he got a promotion. And so, anyway, he came home. Well, we assumed that she was in the car with him. And then we got a call from the hospital, telling us that he had been in an accident. And, of course, we didn't even know where the hospital was.
What hospital?
You see her body?
Yeah, no, well,
The one in Orange?
Yeah.
pardon me?
The one in Orange?
Yeah. And we didn't even, we found it, there was no problem finding it, but we didn't even know where it was. Anyway, we got to the hospital, and we asked, the police, that were there, well, what about his girlfriend, was she in the car with him? And well, they didn't think so. They didn't find anybody. And so they asked Chris, who was in emergency at the time, let's see, they had already operated on him. And, because he had internal bleeding. And they took out his spleen and found out he had another spleen. So he had 2 spleens. He was very lucky. Anyway, he was in recovery, and they asked him if his girlfriend was in the car with him. And he went, yeah. She was there, she was with me. Well, they didn't ask, he's sort of like his father. You have to ask things very precise if you want to get a correct answer. And so I went into the recovery room and I asked him, I said, was Evie in the car with you when you got in your accident? No. She stayed at the party. Okay. Because we were ready to have the search dogs go, search the hills, because he was down in the brush.
Well, they found shoes in the car, and that's why they thought there was somebody else.
Yeah. So, anyway, we got that settled out, and he went into recovery, or he was in recovery, and they told us that he might not walk again. But they never said, they said he might not. They never said definitely that he would not. So we kept that in mind and everything. well, he was in the hospital and he was, they had him in a rotating bed so that he wouldn't get bed sores and all this stuff. And he was in a brace when he got out of bed. And they're still saying might. Except there was this one nurse. No, he used to be transferred from intensive care back and forth. And there was this was a teaching hospital, and it was an intern. He came in and he was talking to Chris. And he said something about, well, you're not going to walk again, or something to that effect. Anyway, I says, just a minute. I says, I'd like to talk to you outside, And so we got outside, and I said, what are you doing? Why are you saying things like that to him? And but, he's not going to walk again. I said, you don't know that. I says, everybody else, the doctors have said he might not walk. I says, but they haven't said definitely yet. I says, we're giving him that last little hope. And so, then shortly after that, they had told us, they had a meeting with the surgeon and all of this stuff. And they told us he was not going to walk again. So we went back to his room and closed the door and everything else, so we could tell him that he wasn't going to walk. And he handled it very well, because he had no one to blame but himself. There was no other cars involved, no other people involved. It was his fault, and he knew it.
Where was the accident at? Where exactly did it happen?
It was on the 57 freeway at Brea Canyon off-ramp, right in there.
So he was getting off the freeway when I...
No, he wasn't getting off the freeway. What happened was he was falling asleep, and so he would start in the slow lane and go clear over to the fast lane, and then back to the slow lane. He was going back and forth. And then he got to one point where he got to the slow lane and he kept going, and he went flying off of an embankment. And the car rolled and everything else. And he didn't have his seatbelt on. And he was put out through the window, and that's when his back broke. The back didn't break, but it bent, and it's bent his spine.
Hyperextended.
Yes. Hyperextended.
Okay. So, I guess so he was in the hospital for a total of 6 months?
He was in the hospital for about 6 months, and then he had to go to rehab out in Pomona. It was on the way to the Pomona Fair, out in that area. And he had to go to rehab. I think it was either twice a week or 3 times a week.
And so I guess during this time you guys probably was changing the house and... It
had already been changed. He had they started building and everything when he was still in the hospital. And it was completed shortly after he got home, because he was in his regular room in the back of the house there for a while.
And so what did they built the...
They built the room and the bathroom and all that stuff.
And it's like wheelchair accessible, so...
Mm-hmm.
And so, alright, so what was the biggest way, I guess, is change your life? I mean, because I guess obviously now you have a son in a wheelchair.
What was the biggest thing
Yeah,
that
I mean,
changed?
well, it's how did this really change your life? I should say.
Well,
It did.
it didn't really. I mean, because he was a diabetic since he was 2, so we were on sort of a schedule anyway. As far as we got educated the same as he got educated, we were very adamant about we were not going to make him a cripple. We weren't going to do everything for him. He was going to do for himself so that he could see that he could do it. And that worked out good because he tried different things then. He started skiing
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Did he get into all that himself, or did you guys, show him stuff or point him in those directions?
Well, he got a lot, like he started skiing, I
He was
think,
skiing
because
before.
he was, but the guy that was training him in rehab, he was involved in sports. And it was Ron Scanlon. He was involved in sports and karate and all of this stuff.
He was in a wheelchair.
And he's in a wheelchair, yes. And so it showed Chris that, hey, I can do all this stuff. So he took karate lessons, and he started going up to Big Bear and learning how to do ski, and I can't remember what they called it.
Adaptive ski.
It was a bucket, where he
Yeah.
would sit in it. But, and he would ski on that. And he water skied a couple of times. But he liked to snow ski better.
Okay. Now, all right. So he gets out of the hospital, and I mean, at this point, do you guys know I've been born, or do you guys know anything about what's happened?
We knew when you were born. I don't know how we found out.
But you guys knew.
We knew approximately when you were born.
Because Johnny came to the hospital and stood outside the window, and Chris just vaguely remember seeing her there.
I don't remember seeing her there.
No, Chris did. She
Oh.
came up there and standing out there, and then she left.
Okay. Anyway, we found out, or somehow we found out that you were born.
Because Chris said.
But there was nothing that he could do at that point.
Yeah.
He couldn't, when he got out of the hospital, then he went to a lawyer and everything. And there wasn't a lot they could do until they found her. Mm-hmm. And so they finally found her. And it was like a year at least. Well, you were 2 years old when they found you. And when they walked up to give her a subpoena, all she said was, she used the good word, and she says, "How did you find me?" Because at that point she was living with Gary's mom and Gary, and so they went to court and everything, and Chris started his visitation.
So now you suddenly had a little kid around the house. How did
And
that?
we loved it.
Hey, you don't have to just say that just because I'm here. But yeah, so I mean, how did that? Now you guys have.
Oh, we were
You guys
excited.
basically parents all over again.
Well, yeah, I mean, because Chris knew, he didn't know anything about, changing a diaper or anything like that. He had to be shown. And he would go out with his friends once in a while. Most of the time his friends would come over and they would just hang out in the bedroom. But he would go out with them once in a while, and I would babysit if he had to. And we thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah. And you guys got a dog?
We had a dog, Peanut.
Yeah. That's supposed to be for
Well,
me.
it was for your birthday, actually. Actually, we gave Peanut to you, but it turned out to be my dog. And you and Peanut got along. You guys would chase each other through the house.
Yeah. Real quick, let's see. We might skip ahead, but first before I forget this, as a kid or a teenager, did you have any like dream job that you wanted to have?
Me?
Yeah, like what was your? Did you guys have dreams back then? You guys had the American dream, but.
Well, when we were growing up, though, we really didn't think of a career job because we were brought up, okay, you get a job and you work for a while, but then you get married and you have kids and, that's your job.
Yeah. So is that what you I guess envision your...
Well, but I had gone to modeling school and everything. I would like to be a model, but then again, I wanted to be a stewardess. I didn't think at that time anything like a lawyer or anything like that. I wish I had gone into the medical field.
But so you wanted to be a stewardess?
Yeah,
Yeah? Was that just a cool job at the time?
at the time,
Yeah. Did you ever try to...
no.
No? Wasn't? Okay, alright, so moving forward. Yeah, are you tired? You need a drink?
Yeah,
You haven't been taking any drinks. You can
I
take a
was
drink.
waiting for you to take a break.
You're fine. You take a drink. I have to edit it all anyway, so.
What, you can't drink on camera?
She can, she just hasn't been.
Damn, I gotta go get more cookies.
Yeah, those things are pretty
Now,
good.
what is that?
This is the charger.
Are we out of batteries again?
Not yet, but Papa
Made
it.
That was the first thing I looked at when I came in here, and I go, "Oh, geez."
It's like, why aren't you
I think I
charging
gotta
it?
remind him.
Hey, it's like, why aren't you
Yeah,
charging it
that-
while you film?
That night of the accident, 200 feet over the cliff, it only hit once, 100 feet down. He went out the window, and then the car went down into the cement ravine, another 100 feet.
Wow.
And they didn't find him right away. People seen it, but they couldn't find him because he was up on the, it was 100 feet, because it was all canyon right there. And they went to the car, and they thought somebody else was there because there was a pair of shoes in there. And then that's this thing that she was talking about, walking again. That's one thing, it's a very sore spot because they were bringing in the life flight to lift him.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as they were getting ready to lift him, it got called away for a goddamn CHP cop that got in a minor accident.
Yeah, I remember you talking
You
about
know, and they
That
said
probably
at
could've
that
saved
time, at that time they could have done something, but it got too late.
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize I was still recording, but to bring back to that, did they just I guess quick point, did they tell him in the hospital or tell you guys in the hospital that he wasn't gonna be able to have kids again or anything like that? I mean, obviously technology caught up to him, but
Right. They did go into that subject a little bit. All they said was, he probably wouldn't be able to have kids.
yeah,
I don't think they didn't say definitely. And we just assumed he probably wouldn't.
Well, yeah, if you can't feel it down there and stuff.
And up until, I mean, when him and Deanna went to the fertility doctor, up until that point, we thought he couldn't have any kids.
Yeah,
And the fertility doctor is the one that says, oh no, there's no problem.
yeah. Yeah, so it had changed. Okay, so let's see. Covered that. And after his accident, you were still working for the trucking company that you hadn't switched over yet?
I'm trying to think.
Like you were carpooling with
I
Millie at the
wasn't
time.
I wasn't working. For some reason, I wasn't working because I spent all the time at the hospital every
You took
day.
that time off from work, from Millie.
From
Oh, so
Millie's?
you were already
Was
with
it
Millie.
Millie's?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, took the time off to
Okay.
spend down there.
Because
Okay.
I went, you know, I was down there, I would get up in the morning and get dressed and go to the hospital, and I was there until probably 9 o'clock at night. Tommy would come by the hospital on his, you know, when he got off work. And that's the way it was.
Yeah, and so you were there every day basically.
Hmm?
Pretty much, you were just there. You were there pretty
I
much
was
every
there
day.
every day because he couldn't do anything because he was laying flat, and like one nurse, she says, "You're gonna have to let him start doing for himself." And I told her, I says, when he can sit up and see what he's doing and be able to do it, I will let him do it. I says, I'm only here now because he can't see what he's doing. And she never said anything, you know, about it again.
All right, so we might be moving way forward. I'm not sure, but all right. First of all, what is MS, and like, when were you diagnosed with that?
MS is multiple sclerosis. And that is on your joints. You have a thing, at the joints you have a thing called myelin. Okay, my myelin, it all dried up. It dried up, was gone. And that means that your joints are fighting itself. I mean, they are rubbing together and all of this stuff. And it affects you so many different ways because you have scar tissue on your brain to indicate that you've got MS because you've had attacks. I probably had MS to a certain degree, even when I was in school, because I used to, you would have to run laps or relays or whatever, anything, but I would run and I would end up falling for no reason. Couldn't explain it. And so, I probably had it at the, you know, when I was in school. I wasn't diagnosed because it's very hard to diagnose because it's got the symptoms of so many other things. And I wasn't diagnosed until probably 50, 60. I would say in the 1980s, I think.
1980s.
Yeah.
So you're still working when you were
I was
diagnosed.
working when I was diagnosed, and I kept working. But there was things, you know, like it used to